Yo, what's up, everybody? We are here again. Technically, Bitcoin episode number 8 or whatever the number is. I always forget it. Doesn't matter. We're back, and I am here today, obviously, with Tyler, my co host, and the sorcerer at Taproot Wizard. I'm obviously from Xverse. You know that, guys. And we also have Dominic, who is actually my colleague at Xverse, but he's also I would say I don't know. I don't even know. He's like the top degen that I know. He's probably in every single alpha group. He's probably in every single token, whatever you can think of. He's in every single community. He's a top degen. And he's also an early Ordinals enjoyer, which you can tell from the fact that he actually has his Sparrow wallet load up. And he actually has some Ordinals and some runes in Sparrow. And so today, what we're gonna do, obviously, Tyler is gonna do most of the heavy lifting because he's the sorcerer, and we want to understand how you can actually navigate Sparrow and how you can get some of these things out. If let's say you have some runes, you want to get them into your Xverse wallet, you want to sell them, you want to transfer them, you want to do some more stuff with them. You have to get them out of Sparrow, and so that's something that we are gonna go through today. So I'm super excited. Tyler, what's up?
Not much, Jan. Good to see you. Glad to have Dominic with us today, sharing his Sparrow experience. I'm a huge Sparrow fan. I'm definitely a Sparrow power user. I think it's very scary initially. The first time I was using it, I was absolutely terrified. I think I made like 5 test transactions before sending one of my OMBs through there,
Nice.
and I was like, well, there goes, however much of Blue Eyes was worth at that time, but I hope that works. Uh, and then, but over time, I have really come to love Sparrow because it gives you a lot of control over what you're doing. It is definitely the power user wallet.
Yep.
The setup I like to use is actually I use Xverse, and then I actually load my Xverse wallets, both the BTC one and the Ordinals one, into Sparrow, so that I can have this more granular control should I ever need it. But 99% of the time I just use Xverse, and it's the little extra double check for me to make sure nothing crazy is going on in the background. So it's something I encourage people to take a look at, start getting familiar with. This episode is not meant to be a full Sparrow rundown tutorial, but more just to show you how you can start to interact with it, and then we'll post some other useful links that explain a little more about Sparrow. You can read things on their facts. There's a lot of other guides out there, so we'll put some of that in the show notes. But overall, I'm really excited to dive into what it's like to actually be a Sparrow user today.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into it. Dom, can you actually explain to us your starting situation? What is happening in your Sparrow right now? What do you have there? What do you want to get out of there? And what is kind of just the starting point? And then, we can have Tyler to jump in and maybe guide you through some of the steps.
All right, so hello everyone, I'm Dominic from Xverse, and I started Ordinals back in like 2023 March. Then my first Ordinals that I bought was a Bitcoin Wizard, and I stack it into my Sparrow because back then there is like no other wallets that I could use. So basically I bought it, and I have been leaving my Bitcoin Wizard in the Sparrow since then. And thanks to like BTC machine, I got like tons of airdrops from the community. So eventually, um, like fast forward to 2024, thanks to Leonidas, I got the Runestone airdrop, and now since we have the dock airdrop yesterday, my wallet is filled with Runestone and also the dock runes. It's dropped by Leonidas. So today we would like to try to get my runestone and the actual rune out from my Sparrow wallet to my Express wallet. I've already funded another wallet address for the funding purposes. Maybe Tyler or Jan could explain a little bit more about why I have to separate the funding address. But it's kind of similar theory that we need to segregate our wallets on Express as well, so we can use one wallet specifically for funding, and then you store the inscriptions and stuff into another wallets.
Nice. Tyler, maybe first question that I have, why does he have so many addresses in Sparrow?
Yes. So Sparrow, I guess all wallets tend to use this nomenclature. It's called HDR. It stands for hierarchical deterministic. Oh, geez, I forgot even what the R is. Wallet. But essentially, within every wallet, you have a thing called a parent xpub and a parent xpriv, which stand for your public and private keys, but these are your parent keys. And when you get a seed phrase, what that seed phrase actually helps you derive is that parent public and private key. Now, what HDR wallets let you do is they say, okay, from this parent public and private key, derive me basically an infinite number of children public and private keys. And so the children public and private keys form the addresses you see here, as well as the private keys, which obviously are not displayed, that you sign any transactions going out of that address with. And so on Xverse, you would you would notice sometimes you want to add another account. You click add account. Literally what that would be doing is maybe your account 1 would be Dom's account there up at the top that ends in AC53W. And then if you click to add account, it generates you a new address. Well, lo and behold, it's going to be the one right below it that ends in TKH6G. And so that's how we actually create all these addresses without having to say, hey, every time you want a new address, go and get a new public or go and get a new seed phrase, right? Because that would just be like ungodly amounts of management. And so this technique lets us derive a bunch of addresses from one parent public and private key.
Amazing. Okay, yeah, I kind of felt that's the case, but I just wanted to clarify if this is something that, is maybe just in Dom's case, or this is just how the wallet works in general. So yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, let's get into it. Dom, can you just like go into the address where you have that runestone that we want to send elsewhere, and let's just make it happen. I think, ultimately you're absolutely right with the funding address. So I think I understand it this way. Obviously, Tyler is probably going to give a better explanation. But I think the reason is that obviously you have this address where you have that ordinal, and you don't want to spend any Bitcoin from that address to pay for the fees, because you would actually risk that you're going to spend it as a fee. It's going to go to a miner and you're going to fuck it up, and it's just not good, right? And so ultimately, for the best security here and probably simplicity, you're just going to create another account. You're going to put some Bitcoin and you're going to use that account to pay for the fee of that transaction, right?
Yeah, the thing I also did before we're making everything happen, the screen might not show it, but when I right click on the UTXO, it actually says freeze UTXO, so I can make sure other UTXO are not spending in the transaction. And once I freeze it on the UTXO tab, it will not show up here as well. So I can make sure the only two UTXO I'm spending are the Runestone UTXO and also my funding UTXO.
Perfect. Yeah. And I actually like operating out of the UTXO interface. I find that that's helpful when we want to send things. But one of the first things I think I'd like to do is talk about how, okay, you have an address, you have your wizard, your cat, your OMB, whatever is in there. You get something dropped to this address, but you don't know what it is. How can I go find what this thing is, because what Sparrow's going to do, as you can see in Dom's address here, is it just takes the label that the address has, which for him is wizard, and then every time something comes in, it just labels it as wizard parentheses received. And that's not terribly descriptive. Like, we don't know what it is. So somehow Dom had to go find, what is this 546 sat output that appeared in my address, and is it worth anything, or is it just 546 sats with nothing on it? So the way you can do that is if you right click over on the actual out point, and then you can click on copy transaction output, and then you go and you paste it into ordinals.com, you hit search. It takes a hot minute to search, but what you'll end up with is that screen we see here where you see, oh, there is an inscription on it. If there's not an inscription on it, it won't say inscription. And then, okay, now I know what this is, right? This is a runestone. So this is an output that has an inscription on it. And, here's the parent. So I see that it is, in fact, Leo's runestone. This isn't some fake runestone that came from nowhere. And so then back in Sparrow with Dom, he went in and labeled it and said runestone. So for everything that you get, that shows up in these addresses, if you're expecting an airdrop or you see something that's 546 sats or 330 or some small number of sats that appears on one of your more valuable inscriptions, more likely than not, it's an airdrop. And this is how you can go and figure out what is contained inside of this airdrop that I got.
How would you check for the runes? Can we show the runes as well?
Yeah, I think Ordinals should do that, but let's. I haven't actually tried, so let's try it out.
Let's try it. Yeah, let's take the other output and let's see if the runes will also show up, which is great. That would be great.
Pop our screen back up here and then paste in Dominic's output and see what we get. And there we are. Look at that.
Nice.
So you see,
there.
we got Dog Go to the Moon. He's got the balance expected for one airdrop to a runestone. And we're all set. So now we know that, the outputs he labeled, one has a runestone, one has his actual runes on it. And now we can start the fun process of actually trying to send these out of Sparrow. So now what we want to do is we're going to want to send out these, and we're going to do it one at a time. So particularly with runes, if you recall from our runes episode, and if you haven't watched it, go watch episode 7. When you send transactions with runes on it, the way it works, if you don't specify anything else, the default behavior is all runes go to the first output of the transaction. And so to keep things simple today, we're going to do 2 different transactions, one with the runestone, which is the actual inscription, and then a separate transaction with the Dog Go to the Moon runes. So let's start out with the runestone. We're going to want to click on that, and then we also need to send, but we can't just send this, right? Because we have to pay for fees somehow. And this is already at the dust limit. This is 546 sats. And so this is why Dom has this funding address set up, because we need to pay for fees somewhere. And by having a separate funding address, it just helps you, Dom, anyone who's doing this, keep track of where the funds that they're okay spending with are coming from. So Dom knows if anything comes out of the L93U address that, this is fine. This is BTC that can be sent to the miners, and, he doesn't have to worry about it. So we're going to probably pop that address open as well. And then we're going to need to right click, essentially, Dom, we need to select both the runestone and the UTXO in the funding address. And then we'll want to right click and send those together. I don't know if you can do it from the address screen or if we might need to head over to the UTXO screen.
Yep. let me unfreeze the UTXO first,
Ah, perfect.
and this one unfreeze. Okay. Um, do I need to do a screen cap on that as well?
That's okay. I think
Okay.
people got how to
Understood.
freeze and unfreeze.
Okay. Then it shows up here. So
Perfect.
it says fun and runestone. All right.
Perfect. And so, yeah, we're going to select both of those and then send selected. Perfect. All right. So this gets us to the send screen. And the first thing Dom's going to do is put in his Xverse address where he wants these to go. And then once that's in there, I'd put the label as runestone for this first output. And then this is probably a good place to stop at the moment and just look at what's happening. So what happens right now is there's only one output, and it's taking the runestone and the funds, and then it's combining them together into a new UTXO with the full value and slicing off whatever it needs from the funds for fees. But that's not what we want, because we don't want to move the runestone to this, 100,000 sat output. What we want is to actually add an additional output. And so we're going to end up with two outputs here. So the first output is going to be the runestone, and we're going to change that output amount to 546 sats. And this helps us essentially keep the runestone on the exact same size UTXO that it was on before. So we're keeping it at the dust limit for Taproot. And then, oh, fantastic. Sparrow already does this for you. It's sending the rest of the funds to a change address. And so if we look back in the addresses section, you'll see that Sparrow generates both addresses for you to store things, and then it generates change addresses. And so Dom actually has two choices now. He can choose to send the BTC back to his funding address. And so if he wants to do that, we can add a second output, and that output will just pay back to his funding address. If he's happy with it going to a change address, he could leave it as is. But I think for now, let's add your funding address back in there. Perfect. And then for this amount, you can actually hit max, and it will just fill in what's left given the fee rate you selected. Awesome. So yeah, right now we're looking good. We're queued up to send the runestone to his Xverse. We're sending any change from the fund back to the funding address. And then right now we're sending it at, it looks like 72 sats per VByte. So the degeneracy of the weekend has cooled down a bit. We don't need to crank that up to 700 anymore, which is great. So I think this all looks good. So let's hit the create transaction button. So this is where I like to do some checks to make sure everything is looking good. One thing Sparrow will often do is it will move around the ordering of your inputs and outputs, and sometimes it won't tell you about it. Here, it looks like everything is working well, but maybe Dom, just as an example, if you go over to the left side, you can actually drag that runestone to make it the second input to that transaction. So you can drag it below fund. And then if we look at the transaction, this is like big red X. If I could like flash it on the screen, maybe Jason can get us one of those in in post production. But this is bad because what you see here is that the runestone is the second input to the transaction, but we seem to have labeled it as the first output, but that's not what's going to happen. If we did this transaction as is, the runestone would actually get smashed into the UTXO that goes back to the funding address, or potentially actually get sliced off to pay for fees. And I think based on our fee rate, it would actually get sliced off to pay for fees. So this is a good lesson for your
What's the
ordinaling.
reason, Tyler? What's the reason for that?
It just goes back to the first in, first out nature of ordinals and sat tracking. So here, the runestone is going to be on the essentially just over 100,000 sat. And you can actually use the size of the little dots as kind of an indicator as to where these things are going to be, thinking of it stacking them on top of each other. But essentially, you're going to peel off a little bit of the funding address and create that new quote unquote runestone output.
Runestone, yes. Yeah.
But it's not going to have a runestone on it. It's just going to be the first 546 sats from the funding address. Then the rest of the funding address is, or most of the rest of the funding address is going back to itself. And then the bottom of that funding address is going to get sliced off. The runestone's going to get, put on the bottom, and then that's going to get sent off into the fees. And so if you did this transaction as is, you'd send your runestone to the miners. Nick over at Luxor thanks you for your service. He appreciates it. But fortunately, Sparrow gives us the ability to drag inputs and outputs around. So we'll drag the runestone back up to where it should go, and then no problem.
Makes sense. And so basically, you always have to make sure that if you're transferring these ordinals from Sparrow, that it's on the first input. So you have to manually check and manually do it that way. What if we had multiple ordinals on that transaction? So you would put them first, and then everything else, like the funding address, would be the last one, right?
Exactly. So let's say Dom had 3 runestones. He could send all 3 in one transaction. And what he'd want to do is he'd want to line it up. Runestone 1, Runestone 2, Runestone 3, funding address. And that's going to be, 546, 546, 546, however much is in the funding address. And then for the outputs, he's going to make 4 outputs. The first one's 546, the second one's 546, the third one's 546, and then the fourth one is just, whatever the funding amount was minus the fees. And so you can do as many of these ordinal transfers as you want at a time. And in fact, maybe I'll dig up some of my old transactions and toss them in there so people can see that. But you just need to make sure you understand ordinal theory. And if you understand ordinal theory and you understand how this sat tracking works, it helps make Sparrow feel a lot less scary, because you're like, okay, I got it. Yep. As long as the inputs and outputs line up, as long as they're the same size, then everything's kosher.
Yeah, and one more thing that I want to actually mention here, Tyler, is like, what happens if, let's say, I do the transaction like we have it set up on the screen right now, but I don't have enough money in the funding address to pay the fees. So I don't believe that Sparrow is going to tell you, oh, you cannot send this transaction because you don't have enough money in the funding address. It's probably going to spend that runestone. Is that correct, or am I getting it wrong?
So in this case, because the runestone is at the dust limit, it will yell at you. It'll be like, you don't have enough fees to just send a runestone. So if, for instance, like, we can actually do that. So Dom, if you click finalize, this has created a transaction. Great. So if we go back to the ledger and then just try and make a new transaction where we just click on the runestone and just send that, I don't think it's going to let us do anything with that. So you can pay to, let's just paste an address in there. And we say runestone, but it's going to tell you this. It's going to say insufficient funds. Yeah. Because you don't have enough money to pay any fee. It doesn't matter how low Dom drags that, fee. He can drag it to 1 sat per V-byte. He can't shave off any sats from this thing, and Sparrow's not going to let you broadcast something that has a 0 fee attached to it.
Makes sense.
So That is a valid transaction. You actually can have a transaction with no fee attached to it. And early in Bitcoin's days, people would just send it with zero fee and it would just get included because we were all having fun back in 2009. But, these days you're going to need to attach some fee to a transaction if you want miners to pick it up. So there is some degree of things baked into Sparrow, but it's not going to, it'll tell you it's low priority, but if you set it to 5 sats per vbyte, that's your decision, and you did what you did.
Makes sense. Okay, cool. So yeah, like, are we ready to broadcast this transaction right now?
I think so. So yeah, normally, depending on how important or unimportant the thing you're sending is, you might want to do a final check just to make sure that runestone address you have on the output is the one you want it to go to. So you can click on the outputs on the left side over there, and it'll tell you. Dom's showing us the graph right now, so you can check and make sure that that's there. But otherwise, it all looks good to me. Dom, this is your runestone. This is real live money here, so I want to check in with you if you feel good about this transaction.
Yeah, I feel great about that.
All right. So yeah, I think we're ready to finalize it, sign it, and send it off.
I think I want to mention the worst case would happen is just sending the runestone to another another inscription to another address anyway, because it's 546 and it's just gonna send, if that's not the runestone, that's another Ordinals, then it will be another Ordinal sending to that address anyway, so
Yep.
I think I'm fine with that.
Yep, exactly. As long as you know that that's your address that the runestone is going to, then worst case scenario, you still have control over everything, and you can deal with it. And in fact, if you do decide to play with Sparrow, I recommend getting some like burner inscriptions and like mess things up a time or two, and see what it looks like, click around, see what happens. We're not going to do that today because we don't want to smash some rune stones and dog runes on the same UTXO and have to deal with it. But it is instructive to do that if you have the time.
All right, so should we kickstart the transaction?
I think so. Yeah.
Do it.
All right. All right, I'll sign it. I'm actually signing it on Ledger. It will pops up a alert that tells me to sign it.
Nice.
Now I'm reviewing on my ledger about the 2 input and 3 output.
Yeah, and that's something I really like about using Ledger. I came from the Ethereum world where transactions were illegible, and it's actually quite nice once you start using Sparrow with a ledger. It's pretty legible. It's like you're sending X amount of sats to X address. Do you want to do this? Yes or no? And you can read the address. And if you're sending something that's worth a lot, I recommend you read the entire address and double check that it is where you want it to go. But the more time you spend with it, the more you'll just realize, oh, these are things that I know and have seen before, and now I kind of get how it's all coming together.
All right, done. I'll just broadcast it now. Okay, let's go.
Beautiful.
Nice.
And our Mempool episode came out today, so now people can learn how it's being broadcast around the network.
Let's go.
Alright, I can actually click on this icon as well.
Yep.
And it will bring me to the Explorer tab, so I might just share it. So basically, that's the runestone out input, and that's the funding input, and that's the fees. That's the first output for the runestone, and that's back to the funding address. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So every once in a while, I have a mini heart attack because what Mempool dot space does is it puts the fee on top of the transaction chart, and I look at it and I'm like, what the fuck just happened? Why is my first output so large when it was supposed to be 546 sats? So you can take a deep breath. The one on top is the fee. What you want to make sure is that, we saw as Dom was clicking around this, that output number one was the exact same size as input number one. And so that means that we essentially preserved, the ordering of the ordinals, and everything is going to the right place.
Some of my friends actually told me about the fee rate acceleration. Like if we don't have any extra output um, going to any other addresses, the fee rates that we set is actually accelerated. Is that true, or like is there any theory behind it? Like for example, I wasn't set at about 72. As I recall, I was set at about 60 or something, but it actually is 72 right now.
Oh, I thought it was set around 72. Um,
Oh, okay.
but yeah, essentially, there can be some wonkiness with calculating fee rates, particularly if there's like transactions already in flight, or let's say you tried to, like, let's say we went and tried to do another transaction right now using your same funding UTXO to send your dog token. Um, that essentially would make the dog token send a CPFP, a child pays for parent of this transaction, because we'd be using an unconfirmed UTXO and spending it again. But you have ownership of it. You're allowed to spend it again, but it hasn't confirmed yet. And so that can cause some fee math wonkiness, in that it's now going to like take those two transactions and calculate the weighted average of the two of them with respect to their fee rates, and then say, okay, collectively, these two transactions together have an effective fee rate of whatever it is. And miners, in order to include this transaction, the one where we're sending the runestone, would also have to include the following transaction where we spend this UTXO, this funding UTXO again before it's confirmed. So you're not allowed to include a parent transaction without including the child transaction. And so that is one way that the fee math can start like playing around. And in fact, if you minted runes this past weekend and you went through the whole UTXO splitting exercise, that's exactly why you did that, so that you weren't spending that same unconfirmed UTXO over and over again. And that would allow you to essentially, modulate your fee rate if you wanted to on 20 mint transactions rather than having them all stuck at the same rate.
All right, gotcha.
Sounds
Very
good.
clear.
The last thing in Sparrow might be good is to just go click on the transactions tab. And then here we can see that here's Dom's transaction sending out the runestone. It tells you it's unconfirmed. It has that empty O that will fill up as confirmations come in. But now that this is out there, you'll see this in your Sparrow. You can go and see the transaction you sent out. So if we then go back to the addresses and start looking at sending the dog token out, we're not going to go. It's actually going to look identical to what we just did. So we're not going to show you the whole song and dance again. But I do want to quickly talk about what it's going to look like, because sending runes is different than sending ordinals. So with ordinals, we had that, that ordering of sats in equals ordering of sats out, and that is the behavior of ordinals. With runes, the default behavior is different. With runes, the default behavior is any runes on any input get added to the first output of the transaction, right? So in this case, we're only going to send dog, and it's fine. But let's say he had some dog and he also had some Wenko, uh, then those could be on separate inputs for a transaction. But if we don't specify anything, they're both going to go to the same output. And so then you'd end up with one UTXO that had two different runes on it, which is a little messy. So in this case, we're going to keep it simple. It's just going to be 1 and 1, and I think for now, I think that's probably a good place to end it.
If you guys have any like questions around Sparrow or something like that, we're definitely happy to look into it. I think this is a really great example, right? Because it's like a real-time example. It's not really a tutorial. It's not meant to be like super descriptive, but it's a real-life example. If you have something stuck in Sparrow, you don't know what to do, this is how you would proceed. And it works, and it's actually pretty simple. You just have to keep a couple things in mind, so that you don't mess up the inputs and outputs, because that would ultimately lead to burning your ordinals, which is something that we want to 100% avoid.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's fun because if you've watched all our previous episodes, episodes 1 through 7, all of the things we're talking about in here should be content that you already have learned and understood. And this is just the real world example of it. So if something in here was confusing, definitely ask us questions in the comments. But also, go back and check those earlier videos that we referenced. So if you're like, why was the ordinals thing, why does the ordering matter? Go check out the ordinals episode. If you're wondering why the runes are showing up on the first output, check out the runes episode. And the UTXO episode is episode number 1 and the basis of everything in Bitcoin. So obviously check that one out. But hopefully this was helpful. Huge thank you to Dom for actually letting us play live with his runestone. There's a lot of faith in the technically Bitcoin teaching team here.
I really appreciate for your help as well.
We're gonna see you in the next one.
Bye everyone.